Hello, welcome to the Datacolor 2013 webinar series. I'm David Toby. I'm Product and Technical Manager for the imaging line of products at Datacolor. Today we are being co-sponsored by LowPro. LowPro makes an amazing array of camera bags, every size, shape, and kind you've ever wanted. David Safar and I have kind of been admiring and lusting after some of their bags as we were looking at them before this webinar. Speaking of whom, today's speaker again is going to be my partner in crime, David Safar, who has an amazing background in backcountry photography. He and I have had our share of backcountry experiences, but his certainly exceeds mine in both the types of locations and the types of shooting that he's done in backcountry locations. So those of you who have an interest in remote photography will definitely find what he has to say today interesting. Now we're going to have Datacolor discounts and Datacolor and LowPro giveaways at the end of this webinar. I would get a little excited about that were I not a participant of the webinar, so I'm disqualified from winning a LowPro bag. But if you're attending, then I would suggest you stick around and see if maybe you can be the one who gets that. So let me introduce David Safar and let him get started with this this interesting topic. David is a professional commercial photographer in Southern California. He shoots broadly, travels, and speaks, and also does the occasional safari, as we call them, but you know what I'm speaking of, photo event with other participants in interesting locations, and we'll get to see one or two of those interesting locations in the photos he's included in his piece today. So David, I'm not going to participate to speak of in your webinar, but I will be answering questions. So as you proceed, I might toss one or two of them out to you if I don't know the answers, if we hear the same question a lot. Otherwise, if everyone would open their dashboard so that the section under questions and answers shows, then you can gain the benefit of what's going on there, the chat, as well as what David is presenting. So without further ado, here's David Safar.
Hi everybody, this is David Safar. I'm glad to be joining you again. It's Thursday, it's almost Friday, how about that? This afternoon, by the way, I'm jumping on an airplane and heading off to Phoenix, Arizona. I'll be teaching a workshop over the weekend that you might want to know about if you're in the Phoenix area. One of the sponsors is Tempe Camera. We'll be doing a workshop on camera to output, which includes color managed workflow, a live model shoot, and post-production and printing. So if you're interested in that, get in touch with Tempe Camera in Phoenix and come on by. This photograph was taken, that you see on the front page, was taken in the Eastern Sierra, very late in the summer, almost fall. And of course that's me standing in the background. The photo was taken by a young photographer named Evan Randalls. So backcountry photo shoots. I think the most important thing to recognize, one of the key takeaways for today, is that planning is key. Is that it really pays, even if it's a day trip away from the road and away from civilization, is planning what you're going to do. And it can take just a few hours to do that. If you're going to have an extensive expedition, it can take months of planning. I think that some of the things that you have to ask yourself about are, what do you want to accomplish? I always talk about begin with the end in mind. Have you set your goals? Where are you going to go? How are you going to get there? When do you want to go? The time of day and season can be particularly important. I unfortunately just missed a trip to Zion and Bryce National Park for personal reasons, and I very much regret that, but we had timed that really around the 1st of November, which is supposed to be the peak foliage season in that area, that neck of the woods. Who will go with you? You know, how good a traveling companion they are and what kind of skill set they bring along with them can be very important. How much ground do you want to cover? Do you want to, say, work from a base camp and do a number of day trips? Do you want to do one day trip? Do you want to be away on a continuous a point-to-point or a loop type trip for a week or 2 weeks? Do you need help on site? That includes guides. That can include transportation help. It can include any number of things, depending on where you go, what time of year, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing's for sure, in the backcountry, nothing is...
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Webinars Made Easy.
That is, what's your commitment? Who's the customer? Is it for you? Is it for just for you and your portfolio? Are you doing this on spec for a potential customer? Or is it commissioned work? All of these things play a part in driving the planning and the scope of work that you're going to do. What do you want to accomplish, and what are your goals? What's your vision? I have a project in mind. I've been getting heavily involved in videography lately as part of my landscape photography. And I have a vision for certain kinds of videography and landscape. And I'm building up to doing several projects after the beginning of the year. And I have some pretty good ideas about, a pretty good idea of what I want to accomplish during those trips. The goals that you can set for yourself can incorporate factors like location and time of day or time of year, what type of image, what kind of camera format and image size. I have a friend that shoots nothing but 4x5. Just the size of the format dictates a lot of what he plans in terms of putting his trips together, his backcountry expeditions and things like that. Do you plan to make prints? If so, are they small or large? Are you going to publish electronically or through electronic displays? What are you going to do about marketing and sales? All of these things have impact on your plans. And another really important part of this is part of an ongoing body of work? Are you extending a body of work that you've created? For example, it's not just landscapes, but it could be a series of desert photographs like the one that you see here from Death Valley. Or it could be a series of waterfalls. Or are you starting a fresh project? There's been several that I've done with David Toby where we've almost on the spur of the moment started a fresh project, and it's been very rewarding. So it's important to think about these things before you set foot out the door.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Webinars Made Easy.
60, 70, maybe 100 pounds of gear right from the start. We've got a big advantage in that we've got all kinds of lightweight carrying gear. We've got all kinds of lightweight clothing, tripods, camera sizes have come down, lenses are more efficient, all of that. So in my book, anything more than 500 yards from the road is a target, a potential target for my photographic work. It's important to recognize that in some parts of the country you can go local. I happen to live in an area where within an hour to 4 hours of me, and that would be something I could consider local because I can drive there and do some photography and actually make it back the same day if I really want to push it, and I've done that. You can go local just down to the beach or down to the lakeshore or over to the mountains if you're in Salt Lake, for example. The advantage of local work is cost and time and accessibility, a big advantage. The disadvantage, of course, is that it's limited by the size of the area that you're going to access. But beyond local, again, it might only be, a day's drive. One of the really useful tools that I've been tapping into more and more and more is Google Earth. Google Earth keeps getting better and better and covering more territory. It doesn't cost anything, at least in terms of money on the table. And the quality of the photography is getting better and better, and also, like I said before, the coverage is improving. You can't say enough good things about topo maps. The U.S. Geological Survey still makes topo maps. A topo map and a compass and a little bit of skill will get you just about anywhere you need to go, anywhere, anytime. And then, of course, there's websites that provide information and inspiration. There's in California, there's a wildflower hotline. There's a photographer who loves to go local who's near me named Steve Sirin. Michael Fry is a very, very well-known Yosemite and Sierra photographer who actually lives in that area. So he steps outside his front door and walks or drives or whatever to areas near him and reports back on the results on his website, so you can see what he's been shooting almost the same day. Charlie Kramer, very well-known photographer and printmaker. Richard Russell, Elizabeth Carmel up near Lake Tahoe. On the East Coast, people like Chris Tennant, Sean Bagshaw, and Ian Plant are all people whose websites you should take a look at. And of course, there's NANPA. There's others that have that provide potential photo locations and image examples. So what I'm saying is that before you ever leave home, you can gain an awful lot of information from sources like this and start to plan your work. So in terms of transportation, I know this is a little bit of a visual pun here. This is what's called the racetrack. It's outside of Death Valley. It's the best part of a day's drive down some really tough roads. But there's some amazing sights to be seen, including rocks that travel when nobody's around. So how will you get there? By auto, 1 or 2 day drive. On road, not much of a problem. Off road, much different animal. The vehicle, you need a vehicle that's suited to the task. You need some tools, lots of extra water, particularly in the high country or in the desert. Elevation and desert locations both really demand that you pack in a lot of water. I'll tell you a little story. A friend of mine was actually going to this location, the racetrack, and on the way back out in his Burley four-wheel drive truck, he got a flat tire. And so he hopped out of the truck and got his gear out and changed the tire and drove about a quarter of a mile and got another flat tire. Now things are a little different. And of course, an hour later, the ranger pulls up and goes, "Yep, you need at least 2 spare tires when you're out in the backcountry." Some people carry more. So you have to think ahead a little bit. There's also vehicle rentals for things like this. There's a vehicle rental right by the entrance to the road that goes to the place that's in this picture in Death Valley. If you're flying, how are you going to pack your photo gear? In fact, I'm facing that today as I'm trying to figure out how to carry 2 to 3 sets of camera equipment with me for 2.5 to 3 weeks on the road. It's pretty challenging stuff. And of course, there's the issue of carry-on and check-in and things like that. One tip that I got from somebody is that, you know, every once in a while you're going to find yourself at the airport and the plane that's going to take you away pulls up to the gate and it's tiny and there's no overhead space and you've got a bag full of camera gear. What do? Well, what he does is he packs away a camera vest, which has lots of pockets, and if he thinks they're going to make him check his camera bag, which most people refuse to do nowadays, he takes a lot of the stuff out of the camera bag and he puts it in the pockets of the vest and he wears it on the plane. It's a nice workaround. If you can get away with it, so much the better. There's also travel agents. I happen to be a AAA member. The travel agents at AAA are unbelievably good. They are persistent. They get the job done in a short period of time. You may find that you need a guide on site or another assistant. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. Now, many areas require an entry fee. Certainly the national parks do. You may want to get an annual pass. If you're a senior citizen, you can get a break on that. You're going to need permits on private or Indian Nation land. The Navajo Nation in particular is very, very strict about this sort of thing. Can't blame them. There's a lot of people that want to go through you know, their areas and perhaps not behave as well as they should, and they want to keep that under control and make sure that they preserve the quality of their environment. In some areas, whether it's national parks or other areas, there are lotteries. In fact, during the Zion trip, we had to enter a lottery to go up into a place called the Subway, which is in the narrows of the Virgin River up above the main part of the Zion Park. In some areas, you're required to have a guide. The backcountry is very rough. Some parts of Monument Valley, for example, you're required to have a guide. And in some places, there may be photo usage restrictions. So you have to be aware of all these things and line them up, again, before you leave home. It can be pretty disappointing to travel a long distance to a place and find out that you can't get in or you can't shoot the way that you want to, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one of the questions you have to ask yourself, of course, is where are you going? And some of that is the season. What are the daylight hours like? And right now we're looking down the barrel of shorter and shorter daylight hours. What's the weather going to be like? A lot of the places that I go, the weather can range from 80 degrees during the day to, say, 20 degrees at night. I kid you not. And so you wind up carrying 2 or 3 sets of clothing, a couple of pairs of different weight boots, several different hats, et cetera, et cetera. How accessible is it? Do you need special gear? Do you need to give yourself extra time to get through a difficult section? What's the fall foliage going to be like? And again, the websites and word of mouth are frequently some of your best sources, and believe it or not, Facebook is one of the places that I look quite a bit. Resources and web referrals. There are apps for your phone and iPad that are very, very helpful. One of them is called Golden Hour. The other one is called Light Track. Both of them can provide information, and these are just examples. There's a lot more of these types of things out there via the App Store and places like that. They'll tell you what the angle the sun is going to be during a particular time of day, and in the case of Light Track, frequently provides you with an overhead photograph and gives you an idea of what shadows are going to look like, what sorts of things might be in the way or be interesting from a photographic standpoint. And of course, Google Earth is a big help in this area. I strongly urge you to consider these sorts of things as part of your planning process. I don't necessarily encourage you to carry these devices with you. It just adds weight. So you have to think about the trade-off in that respect. Now, who's going? You know, the numbers matter. This is a friend of mine, Jim, in one of the slot canyons near Page, Arizona. And, you know, the numbers matter because they drive logistics. There are area restrictions in many cases on the size of the group that you can take with you. You may have opportunities to share equipment. And particularly for long trips, people, you know, want to back up their work. Let's say they're going on safari in Africa. They want to back up their work. Well, how many hard drives do you really need? And how many laptops do you really need? And what one group of people decided, which I thought was pretty sensible, is they had 3 people, 2 laptops, and 2 sets of hard drives. So they had backups for everybody, and they saved themselves a third of the weight, space, electrical requirements, and everything else. And it worked out fine. Skill sets, I talked about that a little bit, but there are some people who have skill sets, for example, in videography that you may not have that you want to bring along. People that have medical skills. Not such a bad idea to have a doctor on the team if you're going on a long trip. And of course you have to think about personalities. Do people travel well together? Some people are better off traveling by themselves. It's a fact. Some people get along with any group of people, any size group, you name it. It's just a matter of putting the right group together. There are a few things more miserable than feeling like you're trapped with somebody that you can't stand for a couple of weeks. Now, help in terms of on-site resources. This is a picture of Monument Valley. This picture was taken by Rick Russell. I'm going to use my cursor to point to something to give you an idea of the scale here. You see this tiny white dot right here? That's a full-size pickup truck. It's really pretty shocking at the scale of this landscape and just how incredibly impressive it is. But there's a truck right there. You would never be able to see this in the full-size version of this photograph if Rick didn't shoot 4x5. But it's just amazing. He did have a guide. It's required here. He did have permits. It's required here. This is pretty much the Navajo Parks and Recreation people. There's the website for you, NavajoNationParks.org. But you're going to need a skilled guide in a lot of places, in the Indian Nations, in the Grand Canyon, in the Everglades, sometimes in places up in Maine, those kinds of things. It really helps to be able to bypass the places that perhaps are not going to give you the greatest photographs and go straight to the ones that are really going to serve you well. In the Arizona Slot Canyon, some require a guide. There's tour operators in a lot of these places. Some of them are vehicle-based. Obviously, in safari in Africa is a great example of that. Horseback and pack animals. There are some areas where you're going to be going for a long time. There's long stretches between sources of water or sources of replenishment of food and things like that. And doing your own portage in that kind of environment is pretty difficult. Sometimes a pack animal makes sense. Canoe, airboat in places like Alaska. There's only two ways to get around in Alaska, really. It's by airboat and by boat. You know, those airplanes can really get you into the backcountry in places that you really could not see any other way. And of course, you can rent vehicles in Death Valley across from one of the resorts. It's not too far from Badwater. Is Farabee, and they rent all kinds of vehicles. Let's talk a little bit about backcountry equipment. There's a lot to think about here. You know, if you don't have it with you, you're not going to have it with you. And I know that sounds like a dumb thing to say, but you better think about what you can do with and what you can do without. This is a Low Pro Rover Pro. I encourage you to go and look at it at the Low Pro website. It's quite a capable bag. There's a number of things on here, and at the risk of repeating myself, one of the things I really like about this bag is the fact that it has a weight-supporting hip belt system. When you're loaded up and you're walking a long way, having the pack shift the weight to your hips makes all the difference in the world in terms of how far you can go and how comfortable you're going to be. The inside layout of the bag we'll save for later. You need to think about hiking gear, how much camera equipment you're going to take with you. In fact, like I said, I'm struggling a little bit with that myself this afternoon. Clothing by climate. And by climate, I'm not necessarily referring to the climate in the general area over a season, but the fact that the climate can be extremely variable. And we all know this, I'm sure. There are days that start off, particularly at elevation, where the day can start off nice and sunny and warm, and by 2 in the afternoon it's below freezing, and there's freezing rain coming down. And believe me, that's happened to me in places like Mineral King in the Sierras. So you have to have the right kind of gear and be adaptable to changing weather conditions, or be prepared to leave. There are a few things worse than being stuck without snowshoes behind a unexpected 6-foot fall of snow and no snow gear. You're going to need appropriate footwear and food. You may need vehicles at least up to the takeoff point. You're going to need some guidance gear. There are GPS devices that are literally less than $100 that are much more capable than ones that you could get only 5 years ago for 5 times that price. But of course, an old-fashioned military-style compass and a topo map and a little bit of orienteering skills will get you just about anywhere you need to go anytime, and they don't run on batteries. You need some survival gear, even if it's a couple of those emergency blankets and some medical supplies and a little extra food and water. And also, but one of the reasons that we're doing this webinar is to tell you about things like LensCal and SpiderCube, which are devices that can help you manage your camera and manage your image capture. So, you know, balance is the key. Look at all this stuff. Certainly, you wouldn't take all this stuff with you for a 2-day trip, or even, in many cases, a 3- or 4-day trip, or maybe even a 1-week trip. I can't see taking pots and pans like this anywhere, except if I'm going to have a base camp and I'm going to be traveling out of the base camp for a long period of time. But the trick is not too little and not too much, and scale the gear to fit the project. And then when you've got everything together, see if you can't get rid of about 1/3 of it, because weight's a key factor. My wife is particularly good at this. She's an ultra-lightweight backpacker in the sense of the kind of gear that she carries and how much she carries, and she can get her load down to an unbelievably low amount and then cover an awful lot of territory and see a lot of things that other people wouldn't if they're carrying too much stuff. Some of the things you have to consider is clothing, and I recommend the synthetic clothing materials nowadays are absolutely fabulous. They can get wet and they'll still keep you warm. They can keep the water off and you don't get condensation inside. You're looking at food, water, medical supplies, and you have to tailor the medical supplies in part to the length of your trip and the level of risk in your environment. That can include, you know, whether you're in a cold weather environment, a hot weather environment, whether you're working along the coastline, all those things have color your decision to and which kind of medical supplies you're going to get. You're going to have some kind of shelter, a certain amount of emergency equipment, some communications gear. I'm going to say this a couple of times during the seminar or the webinar today. Never count on a cell phone for emergency communications. They're unreliable. We just had 2 incidents in the last year where people got lost in one area quite near a series of roads and things like that, and their cell phone battery, they were relying on their cell phone battery. They only carried in stuff for perhaps a 1-hour hike. They got stuck overnight, I think, for several days. No food, no water, no shelter, no communications. Nighttime temperatures dropped significantly. They're wearing shorts and t-shirts. That's an example of what not to do. We also had people in Death Valley who went off-road during the summer, got lost because their GPS just couldn't get the satellites from where they were. Cell phones weren't working. They don't work in Death Valley. Those people were lost for days and nearly lost their lives. So you've really got to think about where you're going, what you're going to need, and if you get in trouble, how you're going to get out of trouble on your own. Technical gear, do you need technical gear? That's the kind of thing that's the talk of experts, depending on where you're going. You will need at least a multi-tool or a knife and whatever special tools you need, particularly things to tighten up loose camera screws. I've got a couple of Allen wrenches in my pack for tripod mounts and things like that. Spares, spare batteries, spare memory cards, you name it. Here's some insider tips, sort of to give you a little bit of a break from all the heavy-duty advice I've been giving. Consider renting gear that you need. It's a good way to try it out, number one. Number two, there's equipment that you may not use more than once or twice a year. It doesn't really make sense to own it unless it's complicated. From an engineering standpoint, you need to practice with it to make it work. Physical conditioning counts. Just about anybody at just about any age can go and do almost any of these things we've been talking about as long as they're in shape. And that means getting out with your boots on and maybe with a knapsack loaded with a few things and going for a walk every day. It's as simple as that. Before you go, it's really a good idea to check operation of all your camera gear in advance, including memory cards. They do go bad. So I'm going to be doing that as soon as I get done with the webinar. Layers work in all kinds of weather, and I include hats. That includes double layers of socks, 2 kinds of gloves. I have an inner thin glove and an outer thicker glove that I can use. So if I have to take a glove off, I don't have bare skin exposed. I can feel through the thinner glove and manipulate equipment. Time of day is important. Another insider tip in the desert, you know, people do this all the time. They're running around at 1 in the afternoon in the middle of the summer, and they're risking heat stroke or worse. So don't hike at midday or in extreme high temps out in the high country in the desert. You're taking an unnecessary risk. It's a good time to hole up, get in the shade, drink some water, have a snack. That's what you do that time of day. Carry some high-energy foods and some extra ones, even if they're just protein bars or sports gels or things like that. Take them with you on short trips, even if you don't think you're going to eat them. They typically seem to last forever. And the day will come where you get a spot of bad weather and you have to wait it out, and it's really be nice to have a snack to keep your metabolism going. Remember that at elevation, weather can change in just a few minutes. That's a big deal. I've been out hiking in the mountains and come up to the top of a ridge line on a trail, going through a mountain pass, and looked up, and 7 or 8 miles away, there's this completely jet black squall line coming at me with lightning bolts coming out of it. And I'm standing there at 9,000 feet looking at this thing coming at me at 30 miles an hour, and I'm thinking, how do I get off this mountain, and am I going to make it in time? And the weather changed from 75 degrees sunny with a light breeze to sleet and freezing rain, etc. And I did make it down into the valley in time and spent the night listening to lightning hit the mountains all around me. So you've got to be cognizant of the fact that the weather can change in minutes, and you've got to be prepared not only to protect yourself, but to take action and get out of the way if you have to. Going back to air travel, that that camera vest is a really good trick if you can get away with it. And I really don't recommend checking camera gear. I just had a story from a friend of mine who had some gear stolen out of his bag when he was forced to gate check it. So whatever you do, I would even consider getting off the plane if I had a lot of camera gear in a bag and they told me I couldn't bring it on the airplane. I just might walk off. Some more summer inside tips for in summer or wet weather. Stay on the paved roads. Here's a really important one. If there is, in an area like the picture that you see down below, this is Zabriskie Point, there are roads that cross what you call a dry wash. That dry wash can fill up with water in a matter of minutes from a rainstorm that's 40 miles away. Now, even if it's just a foot deep in water, don't drive across it. Never cross a road that has water flowing on it. First of all, because you can't tell if the water's undermining the road surface and it's going to collapse. And second of all, a lot of people drown because the water sweeps the car away into deeper water and they're trapped inside, and it's game over. So stay on the paved roads in summer or wet weather and don't cross a road that has water running on it. It's just not worth it. Watch the weather reports. Like I said before, in a lot of the country, particularly if you're in the foothills, you're down below a big mountain range, or you're working your way up into the high country, a rainstorm a dozen miles away can cause a flash flood to come down and sweep through a place where you're hiking in a matter of minutes. And the speed that these things come down, if you're down in the valley when they come, it's pretty hard to get out. Another tip, watch your step and look before you step. Grab something or sit down, and that's not just about bears, lions and tigers and bears. That's about bugs like scorpions and critters like rattlesnakes. I was out photographing the poppies a couple of years ago, and I was thinking, it'd be really nice to get a macro of that little clump of poppies right there. And I took a step forward and started to put my bag down, and a green rattlesnake started sounding off in the bush next to me. So I'm sure if I had laid down there, I would have been in big trouble. It's a good idea if you're in an area that the bears are active and used to stealing food from people to have a bear container. They're cheap, they're lightweight, and the bear can't take your supplies. And I would put anything in a bear container that smells anything like, gee whiz, perfume, soap, food, sunblock, anything that might smell like it's something to eat goes in the bear container. You can also use bear containers or other containers for caching. You can hike in ahead of time and cache supplies so that when you come back, that includes water, extra maps, extra medical supplies. In case you need them, you can go and find them. Of course, always retrieve your cache on the way out and take it with you. For those of us who wear eyeglasses, a pair of spare eyeglasses can be a godsend. You never know when those eyeglasses are going to slip off and go into 30 feet of water in a stream somewhere. Same thing goes for sunglasses. Sunglasses in the summer and winter. People go snowblind, of course, and we tend to forget that. But if you're doing backcountry work and there's snow on the ground, you need an extra pair of sunglasses. Tell people where you're going. I know this sounds like Ranger Rick and all that stuff, but there's plenty of people who wind up having 2,000 people mount a search party to look for them because they didn't tell anybody where they were going, what their route was, and then they didn't stick to it. So it's important to tell your friends and maybe check in at the ranger station and tell them where you're going and when you're expecting to come back about your route and plans. And never, ever rely on cell phones for emergency communication. Some people go so far, if they're really in the outback, to take a satellite phone. I'm not so sure how reliable those can be, but it certainly has to be something to consider if you're really going to be out in the backcountry and there's no other way to communicate. If you do get lost, shelter in place, and I can't emphasize that enough. People frequently try to hike out, say from a disabled vehicle and things like that. Keep in mind that vehicle, it's very hard to see somebody from an aircraft, even from 200 or 300 feet. Vehicles are big enough that people can see them. So why not shelter in place near the vehicle? If you have to move 50 feet or 100 yards to shade, that's fine. Or to hole up out of the snow, that's fine. But stay with the vehicle or shelter in place near where you've decided that you're not going to be able to find your way out on your own, and wait for help. You're just going to expend energy and resources wandering around. The only thing that happens when you're lost is you get more lost. The only thing I think that justifies making an attempt is if you have a critically injured member of your party who, if they suffer from a continuing delay in medical assistance, is going to get either much worse or die. And even then, it's a chancy thing. Let's talk about some examples for short trips or half-day trips. The kinds of things that you need is a good pair of shoes or light boots, a hat, gloves and sunscreen are a good idea. Sometimes gloves can be helpful if you're going to be doing a little bit of climbing, sometimes not. In hot climates, you're going to need at least 1 gallon of water per person per day. That's a lot of water. That's one of the reasons to cache water along a route that you're going to take later in the year. You can go in when it's cool and dump the water off, and of course you have to be able to find it again, but that's what GPS was invented for, right? And of course you can mark your cache. You need a small first aid kit and some accessories, map, compass, maybe a GPS, and a light rope. That light rope can be used for a dozen different things. The most common use for me is if I have to climb up somewhere and I need both hands and I don't want something in my hands or I don't want something on my back at the time, is I can climb up and use that light rope to haul something up behind me, and then of course on the way back to lower that gear back down to the bottom of a pitch and then climb down. It's frequently safer to climb up and down with less weight and to haul things up with a light rope. Somebody mentioned parachute cord to me. I think it was David Toby. There's plenty of different types around. Taking a camera for a short trip, it's typically one camera body, one lens, an extra battery, and a lens cloth. You might want to take along a little piece of cardboard so you can shade the lens from light if you happen to be shooting right into the light. Now that doesn't weigh anything. You might want to take along a tripod, a ground pod, which there's a lot of things that can be called the ground pod, but typically they give you maybe 1 to 2 feet of clearance. Joby makes tripods that could be called ground pods. There are companies like Really Right Stuff that make super heavy-duty ground pods. Another option is a beanbag. A fillable beanbag is just a bag with an opening in it that you can tie up, and you can just fill it with dirt or gravel or beans that you can cook later. And they're remarkably useful on a trip like this because they don't weigh anything until you get there. And they work quite well, particularly if you can get them up on a rock and get a little height out of them. And of course a remote release. If you're going to be doing any kind of serious landscape shooting, you've got to have a remote release. They weigh virtually nothing. You want to calibrate your focus in advance with a spider lens cal, and you want to take a spider cube to shoot for your color management issues, for color balancing your photos. Talk about them briefly. There's quite a bit of recorded webinar and written material on the blog about these devices. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these except to say that the spider cube of the two of them is perhaps the more indispensable. You can put it in any shot and get a gray balance off of it, and you can also use it to manage your exposure. You can see right here this black circle and the black card can tell you whether, if you can't see the black circle on your LCD, you're probably underexposed. If you see the white areas blinking, you're probably overexposed. And of course, you always see it blinking on the chrome ball. That's your specular highlight. A lot of people that take long trips take a spider lens cal with them because their equipment gets banged around day after day after day in a truck, and running around, going from the truck to a blind, et cetera, et cetera. And these people will get up in the morning and take the 1 or 2 really critical lenses, like a couple of telephotos, et cetera, and calibrate them just to make sure they didn't get bumped out of alignment. Now, this is for cameras that have what's called a micro adjustment in the LCD menus on the back of the camera. But it's a very, very useful tool. It folds up completely flat. It weighs a few ounces, and I know quite a few people who swear by it. Now, medium and multi-day trips, these are an extension of shorter trips. They're extended distances or elevations. Sometimes elevation is the thing. In some mountains, you may only climb a distance of 7 or 8 miles, but you may climb an elevation of 7,000 or 8,000 feet. And I can certainly show you places in the Eastern Sierra that are like that. You might hike from a vehicle or base camp where you would have extra supplies, but you have to prepare for broader contingencies such as unexpected weather or a medical emergency. And the longer the trip, the more you have to think about having an extended first aid kit and maybe some extended training. There's a great book out there. It's been around for God knows how long, called Medicine for Mountaineering. When I go on a trip that's longer than, say, 3 or 4 days, that book's in my pack. That covers everything from delivering a baby to setting a broken leg. It's amazing. Consider taking a shelter or tarp, shelter meaning a tent, or tarp and a range of clothing, a tripod and remote release, and perhaps even an intervalometer or a device that lets you take time-lapse photography. Take the lens cowl and spider cube. They're probably the smallest part of your kit and the lightest, and they will serve you well in terms of managing your capture of the images that you want. And again, you may want to consider a pre-trip to cache supplies or equipment. One of the things that I like about this particular bag is that the containers that hold the camera equipment come out, so you don't have to wrestle with the bag and the straps. You can pull this right out of the bag and load it up and put it back. And also note that there's nice points of attachment for things like tripods, extra clothing, and things like that. So those are important things to consider as well. Now, in terms of camera gear and accessories, you're going to want 1 or 2 camera bodies. A lot of people will take the main camera bodies, such as a 5D Mark III, and then take a lighter one, such as one of the Canon Rebels, as a backup. All the lenses will fit it. It takes decent photographs, and God forbid your mainline camera goes out and you're 2 weeks from the trailhead. Now what do you do? So sometimes it makes sense to take along an extra camera body and a couple of extra batteries for it. You have to think about if you're shooting landscape or wildlife, whether you want a full frame or a crop frame sensor. You want to go DSLR or mirrorless. Again, there's weight considerations and capability considerations. Some of the lenses that I consider taking along, I like lenses that give a wide angle of view that are primes, like the 24 millimeter. The wide zoom lenses, the 16 to 35, do a great job. There's a little bit of barreling at the short end of this range, right at 16, so you might want to shoot a little bit more towards the middle, but it's still wider than the 24. A lot of people like to get the 300 millimeter f2.8, which is a monster of a lens. The 300 millimeter f4 is an excellent lens, either made by Nikon or Canon. At f4, with the capabilities that we have now with high ISO, it's a viable alternative. It's half the size, weight, and cost. Some people like the 28 to 300s. There's a lot of compromise built into those lenses. They're better than they ever have been, though. And so if you wanted one lens for walking around, then that might be your choice. A tripod and or a beanbag. On your tripod, you might want a ball head or a pan tilt head. I'm sure you all know what those are, so I won't get into the pros and cons of those. Generally, the pan tilt heads weigh more if you're using a full-size camera. A panel leveling base, this is illustrated on the right. This one is made by Really Right Stuff. If you're going to be doing panoramics, instead of spending 10 minutes leveling your camera and tripod, it'll take you 30 seconds to level everything. It's a big improvement. The only penalty is that there's a weight penalty for carrying it. Not huge, but important to think about. A panel nodal slide. I'm not going to get into how to use that. In this kind of venue, we're actually getting close to the finish line here. But a nodal slide lets you slide the camera back and forth on the axis of the lens so that you can take panoramas and overlap frames without losing part of your frame real estate due to the geometry of the lens. If you want more information about this, you can go to places like my blog, davidsaffer.wordpress.com, or you can go to the Really Right Stuff website or a number of other websites, and you can see videos and written articles about this. Again, a remote shutter release or an interval shutter controller are your friends. So let's talk a little bit about the Zion and Bryce planning that we did. We had planned this to be a landscape, not a wildlife shoot, and timed it for the fall colors, which traditionally peak right around November 1st in that area. And we had planned extended day hikes from the base camp or a car. And I'm not ashamed to admit that the base camp was a motel. Works fine for me, hot water and showers, and lots of hot food next door, so not so bad. This is an area that has narrow canyons with hikes at varying elevations, so you absolutely have to get weather updates every day. It's absolutely essential because there are flash floods all the time. You can have rain, again, 10, 20, 40 miles away, and that water at 30 miles an hour will just sweep you away in 45 to 60 minutes. You need dedicated camera backpacks with hip supports due to climbing and tripod carry. Generally carry one camera on these day trips with limited lenses. We were talking about trips that are 10 miles round trip or less. You need to carry food and water, maps, compass. One thing that a lot of people don't carry, they carry a flashlight, but they don't carry a headlamp. Just think about if you're working in an area in the dark and you're trying to climb down somewhere, you need both hands or climb up. And a headlamp is your friend in that circumstance. Headlamps are cheap. You can get a really decent one for less than $50. The batteries are small and last a long time. They can be set up for varying intensity. They can even be used as a signal light. So a headlamp is a great thing to have on some of these trips where you're going to be coming back and maybe the last part of that trip is going to be in the dark, or you're leaving before dawn. On one segment in Zion, on a way up to an area called the subway, you have to wade through the water, which means you need dry bags, even wetsuits, and there's several rental outfits in the valley that you can get those in. Pro also makes a dry bag called the Dry Zone 200. You might want to take a look at that if you're doing a lot of this kind of work or you're out on the water. It's a national park, so there's an entry fee and then there's a lottery for restricted area access like the subway. So you can see that just this trip, which is about 8 or 9 hours drive from where I'm sitting, required a significant amount of thinking and pre-planning. And even on the short trips, you're going to want to take care that you have things that you need for contingencies. In this particular area here, this is on a hike up to the Emerald Pools, this little stairway that was built along the trail. Not too far from there, I climbed up a very steep area next to the river and was shooting a pool that was nestled in on the cliff. And I found when I went to climb down that it was just too much to climb down with the weight on my back and the tripod. And luckily I had a short length of rope with me and I could lower my gear down and then climb down. Otherwise it would have been a pretty big problem. Now we have some webinars coming up. We're glad you all attended today. I'm also going to get to the giveaways and discount announcements in a minute. The webinars are stored in recorded form at spider.datacolor.com. Some of our previously recorded topics include focus controls and remote triggering, end-to-end color management, soft proofing, the convergence of still and motion capture. By the way, that's something we're going to continue to add content on, is motion capture and videography and time-lapse. We have stuff on floral photography and architectural photography, just for examples. New webinars coming up. We've got small scale and macro photography on November 20th, co-sponsored by Joby. On December 4th, we have an introduction to still image editing and correction using DxO software, and that's co-sponsored by DxO. I want to say thank you to Datacolor and Pro for making this webinar possible. I appreciate the support and the sponsorship very much. Datacolor is at www.datacolor.com or spider.datacolor.com. Pro, LOWEPRO.com. The Datacolor discount for today is 20% off all Spider products purchased at Spider. shop.datacolor.com. This is valid through the 14th of November, and the promo code is PLAN20. This is for the United States only. Now, forgive me, but I have to check and see who the winners are. The winner of the Spider Checker Pro is Greg LeBaron, and the Loa Pro Transit Sling is Rita Chan. Greg and Rita, you can count on our marketing manager to get in touch with you via email and arrange for shipment of these prizes to you. Again, my name is David Saffer from David Saffer Photography. I encourage you to go to my blog and sign up, davidsaffer.wordpress.com. That way you'll get announcements of upcoming webinars on different topics. I also publish technical articles and how-to, and there's a lot of previously published tutorials and content on there. My website is davidsaffer.com, and I will answer questions via email. You can reach me at dsaffer@mac.com. I'm going to be traveling quite a bit. That means there will be days where I won't see my email for 24 to 36 hours. Days, I guess that's a sort of a misstatement, but you get the idea, I'm sure. If I don't answer you within 24 hours, I encourage you to bug me. Send me another email. I just missed it on the first pass because I was on an airplane or stuck in an airport somewhere. So send it over, and I'll do the best I can to help you. Color management, photography, whatever topic is on your mind. David Toby has a great blog at cdtoby.wordpress.com. Lots of really, really interesting articles there, and his website is cdtoby.com. Well, it looks like we're going to finish just a couple of minutes ahead of schedule. I want to thank you all for coming. I hope that you'll join us again during our next webinars. Do watch your email for those and watch the Datacolor website. I wish you all a good week and good luck. Thanks very much.